The morning sun cast long shadows across the Arizona desert when Cassandra Wells made the decision that would change everything. With her heart pounding against her ribs and the taste of fear metallic on her tongue, she pressed her back against the rough bark of a cottonwood tree and listened to the approaching hoofbeats. 3 months of captivity had sharpened her senses beyond recognition, and she knew without looking that Marcus Blackwood rode at the head of that group. The same Marcus Blackwood whose trust she had shattered 2 years ago with a single devastating choice. The same man who now represented her only hope of survival in a wilderness that stretched endlessly in every direction. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 2 years earlier, Cassandra Wells had been the kind of woman who turned heads when she walked down the main street of Copper Ridge, Arizona. With auburn hair that caught sunlight like spun gold and green eyes that held secrets she'd never shared, she possessed an intelligence that made her equally comfortable discussing literature with the town's schoolmarm or debating cattle prices with the ranchers who frequented her father's general store. At 22, she had already refused 3 marriage proposals, much to her father's growing concern and her mother's quiet pride. The Wells family had built their reputation on honesty and fair dealing. Thomas Wells ran the only general store between Tucson and Phoenix that didn't water down its whiskey or shortchange its customers on grain weights. Martha Wells taught Sunday school and organized charity drives for the widows whose husbands had fallen victim to Apache raids or mining accidents. Their daughter Cassandra kept the books with mathematical precision and possessed an uncanny ability to remember every customer's preferences. From Mrs. Henderson's fondness for imported tea to old Jake Morrison's need for spectacles strong enough to read his worn Bible, life in Copper Ridge followed predictable rhythms until the day Marcus Blackwood rode into town. He arrived on a Tuesday morning in late September, leading a string of horses that immediately caught every rancher's attention. The animals were magnificent specimens, quarter horses with clean lines and intelligent eyes, the kind that could cut cattle with minimal guidance or carry a rider across rough terrain for days without faltering. Marcus himself commanded attention without trying. Tall and lean, with dark hair and eyes the color of winter sky, he moved with the confident ease of a man comfortable in his own skin. His clothes were well-made but practical, his boots expensive but worn from honest use. When he smiled, which he did often during those first few days, it reached his eyes and transformed his entire face from handsome to genuinely appealing. He rented a room above Peterson's saloon and set up his horse trading operation in the livery stables adjoining corral. Within a week, half the ranchers in the territory had made the journey to Copper Ridge to examine his stock. Marcus proved to be as skilled at reading people as he was at evaluating horseflesh. He never oversold an animal or made promises he couldn't keep, and his prices, while not cheap, seemed fair given the quality of his horses. Cassandra first noticed him when he came into the general store looking for supplies: coffee, beans, flour, the basics that a traveling man required. He was polite but not overly familiar, treating her with the same respectful courtesy he extended to her parents. She noticed his hands, calloused from honest work but gentle when he examined the merchandise. She noticed the way he listened when people spoke, giving them his full attention rather than simply waiting for his turn to talk. What she noticed most, however, was the way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't paying attention. Not with the calculating appraisal of the men who saw her as a potential acquisition, but with something that seemed almost like recognition, as if he had been waiting his entire life to find her. Their first real conversation happened on a Thursday afternoon when a sudden thunderstorm drove them both into the store's covered loading area. Marcus had been examining a shipment of saddles that had arrived that morning, while Cassandra inventoried grain sacks in the adjacent storeroom. When lightning began striking close enough to make the windows rattle, they found themselves sharing the small space, listening to rain drum against the tin roof with increasing intensity. "Quite a storm," Marcus observed, settling onto a stack of flour sacks with his hat balanced on his knee. "Arizona doesn't do anything halfway," Cassandra replied, continuing to check grain weights against her ledger. "Rain, sunshine, heat, cold, everything comes with intensity." "Including the people?" She looked up from her work, surprised by the directness of the question and the gentle humor in his voice. "That depends on the person, I suppose." "And what kind of person are you, Miss Wells?" The question hung between them while thunder rolled across the desert and rain continued its relentless percussion overhead. Cassandra set down her pencil and really looked at him, taking in the patient way he waited for her answer and the genuine curiosity in his expression. "The careful kind," she said finally. "The kind who measures twice and cuts once. The kind who pays attention to details because details matter." Marcus nodded as if this confirmed something he had already suspected. Carefulness can be good. Carefulness can keep you alive in a country like this. But sometimes being careful can also mean missing opportunities that won't come again. "And what kind of person are you, Mr. Blackwood?" "The kind who's learned that life can change in an instant. So you better pay attention to what's important when it's standing right in front of you." The intensity in his voice made something flutter in Cassandra's chest, a sensation both thrilling and terrifying. She had always prided herself on being able to read people, but Marcus presented layers that she couldn't immediately penetrate. There was kindness in him, certainly, and humor, and an intelligence that matched her own. But underneath those surface qualities lay something else, a sense of controlled power, of capabilities held in careful reserve. As the storm gradually moved east and afternoon light returned to normal, their conversation meandered through safer topics. He told her about growing up on a ranch in Colorado, about learning to train horses from his grandfather, about the satisfaction of matching the right animal with the right rider. She shared stories about Copper Ridge's eccentric residents, about the challenges of keeping accurate inventory when half the town operated on credit and seasonal payment schedules, about her dreams of someday seeing the cities back east that she'd only read about in books. When the rain finally stopped and Marcus prepared to leave, he paused at the store's front entrance and turned back to her. "Miss Wells, would you consider joining me for dinner tomorrow evening? Peterson's cook makes a decent beef stew, and I'd appreciate the company of someone who actually listens when people talk." Cassandra felt that flutter again, stronger this time. In a town the size of Copper Ridge, accepting a dinner invitation was tantamount to announcing courtship intentions to everyone within 50 miles. But looking at Marcus, at the patient hope in his expression, and the careful way he waited for her answer, she found herself nodding before her cautious nature could intervene. "I'd like that, Mr. Blackwood." "Marcus," he corrected with a smile. "If we're going to share a meal, we might as well share first names." "Cassandra." "Cassandra," he repeated, and somehow her own name sounded different in his voice, more musical and significant than it had ever seemed before. That dinner led to evening walks through Copper Ridge's dusty streets. The walks led to Sunday picnics beside the creek that ran behind the church during wet seasons and disappeared entirely during drought. The picnics led to long conversations about everything and nothing, about dreams and fears, and the thousand small observations that make up a life lived with attention to detail. Marcus proved to be an ideal companion for a woman of Cassandra's temperament. He possessed enough confidence to match her independence without trying to diminish it, enough intelligence to appreciate her sharp mind without feeling threatened by it, and enough patience to let their relationship develop at a pace that felt natural rather than forced. When he kissed her for the first time, beneath a canopy of stars beside the creek on a November evening when the air carried the promise of winter, it felt like the inevitable conclusion to a conversation they had been having since the day they met. By Christmas, everyone in Copper Ridge assumed they would marry come spring. Marcus had established himself as a permanent resident, buying a small ranch on the outskirts of town where he could properly train and breed horses. Cassandra had begun making subtle changes to the store's inventory, adding items that would appeal to a married woman setting up her own household. Her parents approved wholeheartedly of the match, her father appreciating Marcus's business acumen, and her mother charmed by his unfailing courtesy. Everything proceeded with the comfortable predictability of a well-planned life until the day Deputy Sheriff Coleman rode into Copper Ridge with questions about Marcus Blackwood's past. Coleman was a thin, nervous man who took his limited authority seriously and possessed an unfortunate tendency to create drama where none had previously existed. He arrived on a Tuesday morning in early February, his horse lathered despite the cool weather, and headed straight for the sheriff's office without stopping to exchange pleasantries with anyone. Word spread quickly that Coleman had brought wanted posters and was asking pointed questions about recent arrivals in town. By noon, half of Copper Ridge knew that federal marshals were tracking someone who fit Marcus Blackwood's general description. By evening, rumors had transformed Marcus from a horse trader into everything from a bank robber to a cattle rustler, to a man wanted for murder in 3 different territories. Cassandra tried to dismiss the gossip as the kind of idle speculation that flourished in small towns where entertainment was scarce. But when she sought out Marcus to hear his side of the story, she found him in the process of packing his belongings with the methodical efficiency of someone who had done this many times before. "You're leaving," she said from his doorway, her voice carefully neutral despite the turmoil in her chest. Marcus looked up from the saddlebags he was filling with the same attention to detail he brought to everything else. His expression held regret but no surprise, as if he had been expecting this moment since the day he arrived in Copper Ridge. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "It would be better for everyone if I did," he said simply. "Better for everyone, or better for you?" The question came out sharper than she had intended, but Marcus didn't flinch from it. "Both, probably. Cassandra, there are things about my past that you don't know. Things I should have told you but didn't, because I hoped they wouldn't matter here, wouldn't follow me here." "What things?" Marcus set down the shirt he had been folding and really looked at her, his winter sky eyes holding emotions she couldn't entirely read. 3 years ago, I was part of a group that robbed a bank in Denver. Not because we were desperate or hungry, but because we were young and stupid and thought we were cleverer than we actually were. People got hurt. A guard was killed, though not by me. I've been running ever since, trying to build something clean and honest, trying to become the kind of man who deserved someone like you." The words hit Cassandra like physical blows, each revelation reshaping everything she thought she knew about the man she had fallen in love with. She gripped the doorframe to steady herself, her mind racing through every conversation they had shared, every moment of apparent honesty that now seemed built on deception. "You lied to me," she whispered. "I omitted. There's a difference. Is there? Because from where I'm standing, it feels exactly like lying." Marcus finished packing in silence, while Cassandra struggled with emotions too complex to untangle. Anger at his deception warred with grief at losing him, while underneath both ran a current of something that might have been relief. The careful life she had planned suddenly felt possible again, predictable and safe in ways that her relationship with Marcus had never quite been despite its surface tranquility. When he hefted his saddlebags and turned toward the door, she stepped aside to let him pass. But at the threshold, he paused and looked back at her one final time. "Cassandra, I want you to know that everything between us was real. Whatever else I've done, whatever lies I've told, my feelings for you were never false." She wanted to believe him. Part of her did believe him. But trust, once broken, couldn't be repaired with words, no matter how sincerely delivered. "If that were true," she said quietly, "you would have trusted me with the truth from the beginning." Marcus nodded as if this confirmed something he had already known. "You're right, and that's why I have to go. You deserve better than a man who's still learning how to be honest." He left Copper Ridge that night, disappearing into the darkness like a ghost who had never quite belonged among the living. By morning, Deputy Coleman had searched his abandoned room and questioned everyone who had spoken with him during his months in town. The wanted posters Coleman displayed showed a younger version of Marcus, clean-shaven and harder around the eyes, but unmistakably the same man who had courted Cassandra. Wells with such patient determination, the scandal provided Copper Ridge with entertainment for weeks. Some residents felt vindicated in their suspicions that Marcus had seemed too good to be true. Others expressed sympathy for Cassandra, though their pity felt almost as uncomfortable as their earlier congratulations had been premature. A few of the older women suggested that she had been fortunate to discover his true nature before making the permanent commitment. Cassandra weathered the gossip with outward composure while privately struggling with emotions that defied easy categorization. She missed Marcus with an intensity that surprised her, missed their conversations and shared silences and the way he had looked at her, as if she were the answer to questions he had never thought to ask. But she also felt betrayed by his deception and confused about which version of him had been real: the gentle horse trader who had courted her so carefully, or the bank robber whose past had finally caught up with him. Life in Copper Ridge gradually returned to its normal rhythms. The store required attention, her parents needed assistance, and the daily demands of commerce left little time for brooding about might-have-beens. Cassandra threw herself into work with renewed intensity, expanding their inventory and establishing credit arrangements with suppliers in Tucson and Phoenix. If she had lost her chance at the kind of passionate love that existed in novels, she could at least build a successful business that would provide security and purpose. The healing process might have continued naturally if not for what happened. On a scorching afternoon in late June, nearly 4 months after Marcus's departure, Cassandra was alone in the store, her parents having driven to a neighboring ranch to deliver supplies, when 3 men entered with the measured casualness of predators who had found easy prey. She knew immediately that they meant trouble, something in their eyes and the way they moved through the store's narrow aisles triggered every instinct for caution that her father had instilled in her since childhood. The leader was a stocky man with graying hair and scars that spoke of violence survived rather than avoided. His companions were younger, but carried themselves with the same dangerous confidence. "Afternoon, miss," the leader said, touching the brim of his hat with mock courtesy. "We're looking for supplies. Food, ammunition, anything that might help travelers on a long journey." "Of course," Cassandra replied, keeping her voice steady despite her racing heart. "What specifically do you need?" As she moved behind the counter, where her father kept a shotgun hidden beneath the cash drawer, one of the younger men circled around to block her access to the store's back exit. The casual way he positioned himself confirmed her worst suspicions about their intentions. "Actually, miss, we're looking for something specific. Information about a man who used to live in this area. Tall fellow, good with horses, might have gone by the name Marcus Blackwood." The name hit her like a physical blow, though she managed to keep her expression neutral. "I'm afraid I don't know anyone by that name." The leader smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Now that's interesting, because we have it on good authority that Marcus Blackwood spent several months in this town, courting the local storekeepers." "Daughter, that wouldn't be you, would it, miss?" Cassandra's mind raced through possible responses while her hand slowly moved toward the hidden shotgun. Everything about this situation felt wrong, from their knowing too much about Marcus's time in Copper Ridge to their obvious willingness to use violence to get what they wanted. "Even if I had known someone by that name," she said carefully, "I couldn't tell you where he might be now. People come and go in a place like this. "Oh, we're not particularly interested in where he is now," the leader said, his voice taking on a silky menace. "We're more interested in what he might have told you about certain activities he was involved with before arriving here. Specifically, what he might have said about money that went missing after a particular business transaction in Denver." The pieces fell into place with terrifying clarity. These weren't lawmen or bounty hunters. They were Marcus's former partners, the other bank robbers who had been part of whatever went wrong 3 years ago. And they believed Marcus had cheated them out of their share of the stolen money. "I don't know what you're talking about," Cassandra said, her fingers finally reaching the shotgun stock. "I think you do, miss. And I think you're going to help us find what we're looking for, whether you want to or not." What happened next unfolded with the horrible inevitability of a nightmare. Cassandra tried to bring the shotgun up, but the younger man who had positioned himself beside the counter moved faster than she had expected. Pain exploded across her skull as something hard connected with the back of her head, and darkness rushed up to claim her consciousness. When awareness returned, she found herself tied to a chair in what appeared to be an abandoned line shack somewhere in the desert. Her head throbbed with every heartbeat, and dried blood flaked from a gash behind her left ear. Through the shack's single window, she could see an endless expanse of sagebrush and red rock, beneath a sky that suggested either dawn or dusk. The leader, she had heard his companions call him Garrett, sat across from her, cleaning his fingernails with a knife while the other 2 men played cards at a makeshift table constructed from empty crates. "There she is," Garrett said when he noticed her stirring. "Feeling better, Miss Wells? Where am I?" Her voice came out as a croak, her throat dry as desert sand. "Somewhere your parents won't think to look for you anytime soon. We left a note explaining that you'd gone to visit relatives in California, so they won't start worrying for at least a week. That gives us plenty of time to have our conversation about Marcus Blackwood and what he might have told you about certain financial arrangements." Over the next 3 days, Cassandra learned more about Marcus's past than she had ever wanted to know. Garrett proved to be a patient interrogator, alternating between reasonable questions and casual threats with the skill of someone who had extracted information from reluctant sources before. His story, told in fragments between sessions of increasingly aggressive questioning, painted Marcus as a man who had betrayed his partners and disappeared with money that rightfully belonged to all of them. According to Garrett, the Denver bank job had been Marcus's idea from the beginning. He had planned it, recruited the team, and led the robbery that had gone wrong when a guard tried to be a hero. In the confusion that followed, Marcus had grabbed the money bags and disappeared, leaving his partners to face pursuit and capture without their promised shares. 3 years we've been tracking him, Garrett said on the second day, his voice holding the patient fury of someone who had turned vengeance into a full-time occupation. 3 years of following cold trails and false leads and rumors that led nowhere. But we finally found someone who knew where he'd been. And that someone mentioned a pretty girl in Arizona who'd gotten her heart broken when the law came looking. "I already told you, I don't know where he is now," Cassandra said, though her protests had grown weaker as exhaustion and fear took their toll. "Maybe not, but he cared about you, didn't he? Enough that he might come running if he thought you were in trouble. Enough that he might be willing to trade what he owes us for your safe return." The full scope of their plan became clear with horrible clarity. They intended to use her as bait, spreading word that Marcus Blackwood's former sweetheart was in the hands of people who wished her harm. They believed his feelings for her would overcome his survival instincts and bring him within their reach. "He won't come," Cassandra said, though she wasn't entirely certain of this herself. "Whatever we had is over. He knows I don't trust him anymore." "We'll see about that," Garrett replied with the confidence of someone who had observed human nature long enough to understand its predictable weaknesses. By the 3rd day, Cassandra had begun to lose hope of rescue or escape. Her parents would have found the forged note by now, But California was a large territory, and they had no reason to suspect deception. The local sheriff was a decent man but lacked the resources to track kidnappers across hundreds of miles of empty country. And Marcus, even if he somehow learned of her situation, had his own survival to consider. But on the morning of the fourth day, everything changed with the arrival of a single rider approaching their camp from the direction of the sunrise. The rider moved with deliberate caution across the broken terrain, his horse picking its way between scattered boulders and thorny mesquite bushes that dotted the landscape like nature's own barricades. From her position tied to the chair near the window, Cassandra could make out a few details through the wavering heat mirages that danced above the desert floor. But something about the way the approaching figure sat his saddle sent recognition shooting through her. With the force of lightning striking dry timber, Marcus had come for her after all. Garrett noticed the rider at almost the same moment, his weathered hand instinctively moving to the pistol at his hip as he peered through the cracked glass. The casual atmosphere that had prevailed in the line shack evaporated instantly, replaced by the tense alertness of predators sensing approaching danger. "Well, well," Garrett murmured, a satisfied smile creeping across his scarred features. "Looks like your former beau has more honor than sense after all, Miss Wells." "Could be anyone," said Jake, the younger of Garrett's two companions. His nervous energy had been building over the past 4 days, manifesting in constant fidgeting and an inability to sit still for more than a few minutes at a time. "No," Garrett replied, his voice carrying absolute certainty. "That's him. I'd recognize that ramrod straight way of sitting a horse anywhere. Marcus always did think he was better than the rest of us, even when we were partners." Cassandra's heart hammered against her ribs as conflicting emotions crashed through her like competing flash floods. Relief that rescue might be at hand warred with terror at what these desperate men might do to Marcus once they had him in their grasp. Beneath both ran a deeper current of confusion about her own feelings. Despite everything that had happened between them, despite the lies and the betrayal and the months of trying to forget him, seeing Marcus ride toward almost certain death, for her sake awakened something in her chest that she had thought permanently buried. "Tommy, get around behind the shack," Garrett ordered the third member of their group, a silent man with dead eyes who handled weapons with the casual familiarity of someone who had killed before. "Make sure he doesn't have friends coming up from the backside. Jake, you take position by that outcropping to the north. Good field of fire from there, and you can cut off his escape route if things go sideways." Both men moved with practiced efficiency, gathering their weapons and slipping out through the shack's rear entrance with barely a sound. Garrett remained behind, settling into a chair positioned to give him clear sight lines through both the front window and the door. "Now comes the interesting part," he said, more to himself than to Cassandra. "Finding out whether 3 years on the run have made Marcus Blackwood smarter or just more desperate." The approaching rider continued his steady advance, making no attempt at concealment or tactical maneuvering. To Cassandra's increasingly frantic mind, it seemed like Marcus was riding straight into an obvious trap with his eyes wide open. Either he had grown careless during their time apart, or he was playing a deeper game than any of them could see. When Marcus finally drew close enough for details to become clear, Cassandra saw that the years since leaving Copper Ridge had left their mark on him. His face had grown leaner, carved into harder lines by exposure to wind and sun and the constant stress of living as a hunted man. New scars marked his hands and forearms, while his clothes showed the wear of someone who had learned to travel light and move fast. But his eyes, when they met hers through the window, still held the same winter sky intensity that had first captured her attention in her father's store. He reined in his horse perhaps 50 yards from the line shack, well within rifle range, but far enough to maintain some tactical options. His voice, when he called out, carried easily across the still desert air. "Garrett, I know you're in there. Let's talk." Nothing to talk about, Marcus, Garrett shouted back, though he kept his body position behind the window frame. You know what we want. Same thing we've wanted for 3 years. I figured you might feel that way. That's why I brought something that should interest you. Marcus reached slowly into his saddlebags, his movements deliberately visible to avoid triggering a nervous gunman's reflexes. When his hand emerged, it held a canvas bag that clinked with the unmistakable sound of gold coins shifting against each other. $15,000, Marcus called out. Every cent I took from that Denver job, plus interest. More money than any of us ever dreamed of when we were young and stupid enough to think robbing banks was a good idea. Garrett's sharp intake of breath was audible even from across the room. $15,000 represented more wealth than most men in the territory would see in a lifetime of honest work. It was enough to buy a ranch, enough to start over somewhere far from wanted posters and federal marshals, enough to transform desperate outlaws into respectable citizens, if they had the discipline to use it wisely. Prove it, Garrett demanded. Marcus appended the bag, letting gold coins spill into his palm, where they caught the morning sunlight like captured fragments of the sun itself. Even at a distance, there was no mistaking the genuine article. Double eagles and half eagles gleamed with the distinctive luster of minted gold, their faces bearing the familiar profiles of liberty that marked them as legitimate currency rather than fool's gold or brass counterfeits. It's all here, Marcus said, returning the coins to their bag. Every penny, plus 3 years of compound interest calculated at standard banking rates. More than enough to make us all rich men, if we can. Be smart about how we handle this. And all we have to do is let you ride away? Garrett's voice carried deep suspicion along with obvious hunger for the gold. All you have to do is let Cassandra go. She never did anything to you, never had any part in what happened between us in Denver. This is our business, Garrett. It always was. Cassandra felt a surge of indignation at being discussed as if she weren't present, but she forced herself to remain quiet. Whatever game Marcus was playing, her interruption could only make things worse. See, that's where you're wrong, Garrett replied. The lady here is the only reason you're talking instead of running, which means she's the only guarantee we have that you won't disappear again the minute we let our guard down. I'm not running anymore, Garrett. I'm tired of looking over my shoulder, tired of never staying in one place long enough to build anything worth having. You want the money? It's yours. But the woman walks away clean. Mighty generous of you, considering what she did to you in Copper Ridge. The comment hit its target with devastating accuracy. Marcus's face tightened almost imperceptibly, but Cassandra caught the flinch and felt her own shame burn hotter. Somehow Garrett had learned about her role in forcing Marcus to flee, about her choice to prioritize her own safety over trust in the man she claimed to love. Ancient history, Marcus said, though his voice had grown colder. Water under the bridge, is it? Because the way I heard it, she sold you out the minute things got complicated. Soon as Deputy Coleman started asking questions, she was ready to let the law take you rather than stand by her man. Doesn't seem like the kind of woman worth dying for, if you ask me. Each word was calculated to inflict maximum damage, to drive wedges between Marcus and any lingering feelings he might harbor for Cassandra. Garrett understood human nature well enough to know that men could be manipulated through their pride as easily as through their desires. Maybe, Marcus replied, but it's not about what she deserves. It's about what kind of man I want to be when this is over. The simple dignity in that statement cut through Cassandra's heart like a blade heated in forge fire. Here was Marcus, offering everything he had to men who had hunted him for 3 years, not because she had earned such sacrifice, but because his own moral code demanded it. The contrast between his response and her own behavior in Copper Ridge could not have been more stark or more damning. Pretty words, Garrett said. But words don't spend. Here's my counteroffer, Marcus. You come in here, unarmed, and we'll discuss terms face to face, like civilized men. And if I don't, then Miss Wells starts losing pieces. Starting with fingers and working up to more important parts. I've got all day and a very sharp knife. The casual brutality of the threat sent ice water through Cassandra's veins. She had witnessed Garrett's capacity for violence over the past 4 days, but something in his voice now suggested that torture held genuine appeal for him beyond its utility as a negotiating tactic. Marcus sat his horse in silence for long minutes, weighing options that all seemed to lead toward the same inevitable conclusion. Finally, he dismounted and began removing his gun belt with movements that spoke of profound reluctance. "Smart man," Garrett called out. "Leave the hardware on your saddle and come on in. Keep your hands where I can see them." As Marcus approached the line shack, Cassandra caught sight of something that sent hope flickering through her despair. His right boot, she noticed, sat slightly askew on his foot, creating a small gap at the ankle that hadn't been there moments before. She had seen him demonstrate the trick once during their courtship days, showing her how he could conceal a small derringer in a specially modified boot if circumstances demanded it. The memory was so vivid that she could almost hear his voice explaining that sometimes the best hiding place was the one your enemies never thought to search. Marcus paused at the threshold, his eyes finding Cassandra's face and holding her gaze for several heartbeats. In that moment, she saw not accusation or resentment, but something that looked remarkably like an apology, as if he were the one who owed her forgiveness rather than the other way around. "Hello, Cassandra," he said quietly. "I'm sorry it took me so long to get here." Before she could respond, Garrett stepped forward and pressed the barrel of his revolver against Marcus's temple with enough force to indent the skin. "Touching reunion," he said. "Now, let's talk about that money you brought. And more importantly, let's talk about the rest of it." "The rest of what?" "Don't play games with me, Marcus. 15,000 was what we took from that bank, but it wasn't all the money involved. There was supposed to be a second shipment, remember? The big score we were planning before everything went to hell." Cassandra saw Marcus's confusion and realized that whatever Garrett was referring to, it went beyond the Denver bank robbery that had originally driven Marcus from Copper Ridge. There were layers to the story that she didn't understand. Complications that made the situation even more dangerous than she had imagined. "I don't know what you're talking about, Garrett. The Denver job was a disaster from start to finish. There was no second shipment, no big score. Just a botched robbery that got a man killed and turned us all into wanted men." "Liar!" The word came out as a snarl, and Garrett's finger tightened on his revolver's trigger. "You knew about the Army payroll. You knew it was coming through 3 days after the bank job. That's why you wanted us to stay in the area, why you kept talking about one more score to make the whole thing worthwhile." Understanding dawned in Marcus's eyes, followed immediately by a rage so pure it seemed to radiate heat like a forge fire. "You son of a bitch," he whispered. "You hit the Army payroll without me. That's why you really want me dead, isn't it? Not because I cheated you out of the bank money, but because I wasn't there to take my share of the blame when you robbed a federal shipment." 25,000 in gold eagles, Garrett confirmed, his voice thick with satisfaction at Marcus's reaction. "Enough to set us up for life if we'd been smart about it. But you disappeared with our stake money, left us broke and desperate. So we took a chance on the payroll job, and it went wrong in ways that made the bank robbery look like Sunday school." "How?" "Wrong? Dead soldiers wrong. Federal marshals wrong. Wanted posters in every territory from here to the Mississippi wrong." The full scope of the disaster became clear to Cassandra as she listened to this exchange. Marcus had unwittingly saved himself by fleeing after the bank robbery, avoiding involvement in a second crime that would have made him a target for federal rather than local law enforcement. But now Garrett intended to use him as a scapegoat. a way of deflecting attention from the surviving members of the gang who had participated in killing federal troops. "So you see," Garrett continued, "this isn't just about money anymore. It's about survival. And survival means making sure that Marcus Blackwood takes the blame for everything that went wrong. Both in Denver and with the Army payroll, Marcus's hand moved with the liquid speed that had made him formidable in their outlaw days, the concealed derringer appearing in his palm as if by magic. But Garrett had been expecting treachery and reacted with equal quickness, his revolver swinging toward Marcus's chest even as the smaller weapon cleared leather. The explosion of gunfire in the confined space was deafening, smoke and flame filling the air between the two men. Cassandra screamed, though she couldn't hear her own voice over the ringing in her ears. Through the haze, she saw both men staggering, both wounded, both trying to bring their weapons to bear for a second shot that would determine which of them lived to see another sunrise. But before either could fire again, Jake burst through the front door with his rifle already shouldered and aimed. His shot took Marcus high in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending the derringer flying across the room to clatter uselessly in the corner. Marcus hit the floor hard, blood spreading across his shirt from wounds that looked serious but not immediately fatal. "Should have stayed dead, Marcus," Garrett gasped, pressing his hand against a spreading red stain on his own abdomen. "Would have been easier for everyone that way." "Maybe," Marcus replied through gritted teeth. "But I never was much good at taking the easy way." Tommy appeared in the doorway behind Jake, his rifle trained on Marcus with the steady aim of someone prepared to finish what others had started. The situation had deteriorated beyond any hope of negotiation or peaceful resolution. One way or another, the next few minutes would determine who walked away from this desert confrontation and who remained behind to feed the buzzards and coyotes. That was when Cassandra made the decision that would haunt her dreams for years to come. The chair she was tied to had grown loose over the days of her captivity, its bindings stretched by her constant subtle movements. With a desperate surge of adrenaline-fueled strength, she broke free and threw herself toward the fallen derringer, her hand closing around its grip just as Tommy's rifle swung toward her. The small gun bucked in her palm as she fired. The bullet taking Tommy's center mass and dropping him where he stood. Jake spun toward her, his own weapon tracking to meet this new threat. But Marcus had used the distraction to regain his footing despite his wounds. His tackle carried both men crashing through the line shack's front window in an explosion of glass and splintered wood, their bodies hitting the hard-packed earth outside with bone-jarring force. Garrett, wounded but still dangerous, raised his revolver toward Cassandra with shaking hands. She had one shot remaining in the derringer, one chance to end this before he could kill her and Marcus both. Time seemed to slow as she brought the small weapon up, her finger tightening on the trigger while Garrett's own gun steadied on her chest. The desert morning exploded into chaos as both weapons fired simultaneously, their reports echoing off the surrounding rocks like thunder in a canyon. When the smoke cleared and the echoes faded, only one of them remained standing, while the other lay motionless in a spreading pool of crimson that looked almost black against the packed earth floor outside. The struggle between Marcus and Jake had ended as well, though the outcome remained unclear through the shattered window. Cassandra stumbled toward the opening, the empty derringer falling from nerveless fingers as the full weight of what she had done crashed down upon her. She had killed a man. Whatever else happened, whatever the future held, that fact would remain with her forever. The careful, law-abiding life she had built in Copper Ridge was gone as surely as if it had never existed, burned away in moments of violence that had transformed her from victim to participant in ways she could never undo. But Marcus was alive, wounded but breathing, picking himself up from Jake's still form with movements that spoke of pain but not defeat. When their eyes met through the broken window, she saw reflected there the same shock and disbelief that she felt in her own soul. They had survived, both of them, but at a cost that would change everything about who they were and who they might become. The desert stretched endlessly around them, offering both freedom and exile from the lives they had known. And somewhere in that vast emptiness, they would have to decide what kind of future was possible for two people who had just crossed lines that could never be uncrossed. The desert sun climbed higher as Cassandra tended to Marcus's wounds beside the ruins of the line shack, her hands working with steady precision despite the trembling that seemed to start deep in her bones and radiate outward. She had torn strips from her petticoat to create makeshift bandages, the white cotton already staining red as she pressed them against the bullet hole in his shoulder. The injury was serious but clean, the bullet having passed through muscle. Without striking bone or major arteries, Marcus sat propped against a boulder, his face pale but alert as he watched her work. Neither of them had spoken since the gunfight ended, the weight of what they had done settling between them like a physical presence. 3 men lay dead in and around the shack, their blood already beginning to attract the flies that appeared with supernatural speed whenever violence visited the desert. "We need to move," Marcus said finally, his voice rough with pain and exhaustion. "Those shots will carry for miles in air this thin. Anyone within hearing distance will come to investigate." Cassandra nodded without looking up from her work. She understood the urgency, but her hands seemed determined to complete their task with the thoroughness that had always characterized everything she did. As if properly dressing his wounds could somehow restore order to a world that had tilted off its axis. "There," she said, securing the final bandage with a strip torn from her sleeve. "That should hold until we can find proper medical attention. Thank you." Marcus tested his range of motion carefully, wincing as the movement pulled at his injured shoulder. "Cassandra, about what happened in there. Don't." The word came out sharper than she intended. "Whatever you're going to say, don't. Not yet." She stood and walked to where Garrett's body lay sprawled in the doorway, forcing herself to look at what her bullet had done. The man who had terrorized her for days now seemed smaller in death, diminished in ways that went beyond the simple absence of breath and heartbeat. She had ended a human life with her own hands, and the magnitude of that act pressed down on her like a physical weight. Marcus struggled to his feet, favoring his injured side, but moving with the careful determination of someone accustomed to functioning despite pain. He retrieved his gun belt from where he had discarded it outside, checking his weapons with the automatic efficiency of long practice. "We need horses," he said. "Water, supplies, and we need to put distance between ourselves and this place before federal marshals start following the trail." Federal marshals? Garrett wasn't lying about the Army payroll. Killing federal troops brings a different kind of attention than robbing banks. The kind that doesn't stop looking until they find answers or bodies. Cassandra felt a new chill that had nothing to do with the desert morning. In the space of a few minutes, she had gone from kidnapped victim to fugitive from federal justice. The life she had known in Copper Ridge, the store, her parents, the predictable rhythms of small-town existence, might as well have belonged to someone else entirely. "Where can we go?" she asked. Marcus was already moving toward the horses, his movements efficient despite his injury. "Mexico, maybe. Or deeper into the territories where federal authority gets thin. Depends on how badly they want us and how long we can stay ahead of them." "Us?" The words slipped out before she could stop it. Marcus paused in his examination of the horse's tack, his winter sky eyes finding hers across the small clearing. "You can't go back, Cassandra. Not after this. You killed Tommy in there, and Garrett's men had federal connections. Your name will be on wanted posters within a week." The reality of her situation crashed over her with fresh force. She had made her choice in the heat of the moment, driven by desperation and the need to save Marcus's life. But choices made in seconds could reshape entire lifetimes, and hers had just taken a turn toward territories she had never imagined exploring. "My parents," she whispered. "They'll think I'm dead, or worse, they'll know what I've become." "Maybe that's for the best right now," Marcus said gently. "Let them mourn a daughter who died trying to escape rather than learn about one who survived by becoming something she never wanted to be." His words stung with their practical truth, but they also carried an understanding that surprised her. This was a man who had lived with the consequences of violent choices for years, who understood the weight of transformation that came with crossing certain lines. They worked in efficient silence to prepare for departure, salvaging what supplies they could from the Outlaw's camp and securing them to the horses. Marcus had brought a strong bay gelding that showed signs of careful selection and training, while Garrett's men had ridden serviceable but unremarkable mounts that spoke of practical rather than aesthetic concerns. As they prepared to leave, Cassandra found herself drawn back to the line shack one final time. The building that had been her prison for 4 days now held 3 corpses and enough blood to paint a picture of violence that would haunt her dreams. But it also marked the place where her old life had ended and something new had begun, though she couldn't yet say what that something might become. "Second thoughts?" Marcus asked, leading his horse to where she stood. "About leaving? No. About everything else?" She turned to face him fully. "I don't know how to be what I've become, Marcus. I don't know how to live with what I've done. Neither did I at first, but you learn. Day by day, choice by choice, you figure out how to carry the weight without letting it crush you completely. And if I can't, if the weight is too much?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his gaze moving across the desert landscape that stretched endlessly in all directions. When he spoke again, his voice carried hard-won wisdom and something that might have been hope. "Then you find someone willing to help you carry it. Someone who understands what it feels like to lose yourself and have to build something new from the pieces that remain." They rode south through a country that grew progressively more desolate as the morning advanced. The terrain shifted from high desert, dotted with juniper and sage, to lower elevations, where barrel cactus and prickly pear dominated the landscape. Heat rose in shimmering waves from rocks and sand, creating mirages that transformed distant mountains into floating islands suspended above phantom lakes. Marcus set a pace that balanced the need for distance against the limitations imposed by his injury and the horse's endurance. He had the navigator's instinct for reading terrain, guiding them along paths that offered concealment from casual observation while avoiding the obvious routes that pursuing lawmen would check first. They paused frequently to rest the animals and allow Marcus's wounds time to stabilize, using these stops to share water and the jerky they had salvaged from the Outlaw's supplies. Conversation remained minimal, each lost in thoughts too complex for easy expression. But gradually, as miles accumulated behind them and no signs of pursuit appeared, some of the immediate tension began to ease. It was during one of these rest stops, with the sun approaching its zenith and the heat becoming genuinely dangerous, that Cassandra finally found words for questions that had been building since Marcus first appeared on the horizon. "How did you know where to find me?" Marcus was checking his horse's hooves for stones, his movements careful and methodical. Words travel fast in countries like this, especially words about strangers asking questions in the wrong places. "I heard about 3 men looking for Marcus Blackwood and his lady friend about a week ago, and you came anyway, knowing it was a trap." "I came because it was a trap." He straightened, meeting her gaze directly. "Because they were using you to get to me, and I couldn't live with that on my conscience. Even after what I did in Copper Ridge, even after I chose safety over trust." The question hung between them like a blade suspended by a hair, sharp with the accumulated pain of their shared past. Marcus was quiet for so long that Cassandra began to think he wouldn't answer at all. "I was angry," he finally admitted. "For months after I left, I told myself that you had proven what I should have expected all along. That a woman like you could never really accept a man like me, no matter what pretty words we shared. And now Now I think we were both trying to be people we weren't ready to be yet. You were trying to love someone whose past terrified you, and I was trying to deserve someone whose future I couldn't guarantee." The honesty in his words cut deeper than accusation would have. Cassandra felt tears threatening, though whether from grief or relief or simple exhaustion, she couldn't say. "I was scared," she whispered. "When Deputy Coleman showed me those wanted posters, when I realized how much of your life had been built on deception, I panicked. I chose the known over the unknown, the safe path over the uncertain one. And if you had to make that choice again, now, after everything that's happened?" The question demanded an answer that she wasn't sure she was ready to give. But looking at Marcus, at the patient way he waited, at the fresh blood seeping through his bandages, at the quiet courage that had brought him riding into certain danger for her sake, she felt something shift inside her chest. "I think," she said slowly, "that safety is an illusion. That the careful life I thought I was protecting was never as solid as I believed. And that some things are worth the risk of losing everything else." Marcus nodded as if this confirmed something he had hoped but not dared to expect. "Then maybe we can figure out how to build something real this time. Something based on who we actually are instead of who we thought we should be." They resumed riding as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, painting the desert in shades of gold and copper that seemed to set the entire world ablaze. The horses moved with the steady rhythm of animals settling into a long journey, their hooves raising small clouds of dust that dissipated quickly in the dry air. As afternoon stretched toward evening, they began to encounter signs of human habitation. Again, distant smoke suggested settlements or ranches hidden among the rocky outcroppings, while well-worn trails spoke of regular traffic between communities scattered across the vast landscape. But these signs also meant increased danger of recognition or capture, forcing them to exercise greater caution in their route selection. "There's a place I know," Marcus said as they navigated around a cluster of towering rock formations that rose from the desert floor like the ruins of some ancient civilization. "A trading post run by a man who doesn't ask questions and doesn't volunteer information to passing lawmen. We can rest there, get proper medical supplies, maybe even send word to your parents that you're alive." "What kind of word? What do I tell them that won't destroy them or put them in danger?" "The truth, as much of it as they can handle. That you escaped your captors, that you're safe, but that you can't come home yet. Let them hope that someday you will, even if we both know it probably isn't possible." The prospect of communicating with her parents brought fresh pain, but also a sense of relief that she hadn't realized she needed. The idea that Thomas and Martha Wells would spend the rest of their lives wondering what had happened to their daughter was almost unbearable. At least this way they would know she lived, even if they could never know the full cost of her survival. "And after that? After we rest and resupply and send word home?" Marcus was quiet for a moment, his eyes scanning the horizon with the constant vigilance of someone who had learned that safety was always temporary and often illusory. "After that, we keep moving. South toward Mexico, or west toward California, or deeper into the territories where federal authority gets thin and people care more about what you can do than what you might have done. We find a place where we can build something new, something that belongs to us instead of to our pasts." "As what? Outlaws? Fugitives?" "As whatever we choose to become. The past doesn't have to define the future, Cassandra. Not if we're willing to work hard enough to create something better." His words carried a conviction that she wanted desperately to share, but doubt remained like a persistent ache in her chest. Could people really change that fundamentally? Could the weight of violence and betrayal be transformed into something resembling redemption? She didn't know, but looking at Marcus, at the man who had risked everything to save her despite having every reason to let her face the consequences of her own choices, she began to think that maybe the attempt was worth making. The sun touched the horizon as they crested a low ridge and saw their destination spread out below them. The trading post was larger than she had expected, a collection of adobe buildings surrounding a central courtyard, where travelers could water their animals and conduct business in relative safety. Smoke rose from several chimneys, while the warm glow of lantern light spilled from windows and doorways, creating an oasis of civilization in the vast emptiness of the desert. "Last chance to change your mind," Marcus said as they began their descent toward the settlement. "Once we ride down there together, we're committed to this path. Whatever comes next, we face it as partners rather than as separate people trying to salvage individual futures." Cassandra looked back the way they had come, toward a northern horizon that hid Copper Ridge and everything she had once thought she wanted from life. The careful world of account books and church socials and predictable tomorrows seemed impossibly distant now, separated from her current reality by more than mere miles. When she turned back toward the trading post, toward Marcus and the uncertain future that waited in the gathering darkness, she felt something that might have been peace settling over her shoulders like a familiar shawl. "I'm ready," she said, and meant it. The trading post of Santiago's Crossing existed in the liminal space between civilization and wilderness, a place where questions weren't asked and past could be temporarily forgotten for the price of honest payment. Don Santiago Morales had built his establishment in a natural depression between two mesas, where an underground spring provided reliable water year-round in the terrain, offered protection from both desert storms and unwanted visitors. Cassandra and Marcus approached the main building as evening shadows lengthened across the courtyard, their horses' hooves echoing softly against the packed earth. The structure itself was a testament to practical architecture, thick adobe walls designed to keep interiors cool during scorching days and warm during cold desert nights, with narrow windows positioned to provide defensive advantages if circumstances demanded them. Santiago himself emerged from the main building as they dismounted, a man of perhaps 60 years whose weathered face spoke of decades spent reading the character of travelers who sought shelter in remote places. His eyes took in their travel-stained clothes, Marcus's makeshift bandages, and the particular weariness that came from running hard toward an uncertain destination. Senorita," he said in accented English, his tone carefully neutral. "Welcome to Santiago's Crossing. You seek lodging for the night?" "Lodging, supplies, and medical attention," Marcus replied, his voice steady despite the exhaustion Cassandra could see in the tight lines around his eyes. "We can pay in gold." Santiago's eyebrows rose slightly at the mention of gold, but his expression remained professionally impassive. "Of course. Maria will see to your injuries, and we have rooms available. Your horses will be well cared for." As if summoned by her name, a woman appeared from a side building, moving with the brisk efficiency of someone accustomed to tending wounded travelers. Maria Morales was perhaps 40, with intelligent dark eyes and hands that showed the calluses of honest work. She took one look at Marcus's blood-stained shirt and gestured toward a building that clearly served as the post's medical facility. "Come," she said simply. "The wound needs proper cleaning before infection sets in." While Maria worked on Marcus's injuries with professional competence, Cassandra found herself alone with Santiago in the trading post's main room. The space served multiple functions: general store, saloon, and informal meeting place for travelers. Passing through the vast emptiness of the borderlands, shelves lined the walls, stocked with everything from ammunition and tobacco to bolts of cloth and patent medicines. "You have traveled far today," Santiago observed, setting a cup of coffee before her without being asked. The liquid was strong and bitter, but it carried warmth that seemed to penetrate bones chilled by more than desert evening air. "Far enough," Cassandra replied carefully. "And you will travel farther tomorrow, I think. There is something in your eyes, the look of people who cannot afford to remain in one place too long." His perception was unsettling, but Cassandra sensed no threat in it. Santiago Morales had clearly built his business on discretion and his reputation on reliability. People came to places like this precisely because they needed shelter from questions and judgments that awaited them in more civilized locations. Perhaps, she admitted, though where we're going depends on circumstances beyond our immediate control. Santiago nodded as if this explained everything he needed to know. In that case, you may wish to know that federal marshals passed through here 3 days ago. They carried wanted posters and asked many questions about strangers traveling south. Ice formed in Cassandra's stomach despite the coffee's warmth. What did you tell them? That I see many travelers and most wish to pass through without creating memorable impressions. Which is, of course, the truth. His smile held gentle irony. They seemed unsatisfied with this answer, but they had no authority to search my buildings or interrogate my guests. And if they return, then I will tell them the same thing. Santiago's crossing has survived by maintaining neutrality in conflicts that do not concern us directly. Your business is your own, Senorita, as long as it does not bring violence to my establishment or endanger other guests. The implied warning was clear but delivered without hostility. This was neutral ground, but neutrality came with obligations on both sides. Cassandra understood that Santiago would protect them as long as their presence didn't compromise his ability to protect others. Maria emerged from the medical building with Marcus following close behind, his shoulder now properly bandaged and his arm supported by a clean sling. The professional competence of her treatment showed in his improved posture and the reduced tension around his eyes. The wound is clean, Maria reported to Santiago in Spanish, though she clearly intended Cassandra to understand. No infection yet, but he needs rest and time for healing. Several days, ideally. Several days they might not have, Cassandra thought. But looking at Marcus, she could see that Maria's assessment was accurate. The blood loss and physical stress of their escape had taken a toll that couldn't be ignored without risking more serious complications. We'll take 2 rooms for the night, Marcus said, settling carefully into a chair beside Cassandra. And supplies for extended travel. Food, water, ammunition if you have it, of course. And perhaps you would like to send word to concerned parties that you are safe? I maintain arrangements with certain freight companies whose drivers carry messages along with their regular cargo. The offer was made casually, but Cassandra caught the significance immediately. Here was a way to communicate with her parents without revealing their location or creating traceable evidence of their passage. The relief was so intense it made her dizzy. Yes, she said quickly. I would very much like to send word to my family. Santiago produced paper and ink with the practiced efficiency of someone who had facilitated such communications many times before. Write what you wish them to know. My drivers ask no questions and read no private correspondence. Cassandra stared at the blank paper for long minutes, struggling to find words that could bridge the gap between her old life and her current reality. How did you tell parents who had raised you to respect law and order that you had killed a man in a gunfight? How did you explain that their careful, responsible daughter had chosen to flee into the wilderness with a wanted outlaw rather than face the consequences of her actions? Finally, she began to write, Dearest mother and father, I am alive and safe. Though I cannot return home for reasons I cannot fully explain, please do not attempt to find me or send anyone looking. The men who took me are dead, but my escape has created complications that make it impossible for me to resume my old life. Know that I love you both deeply and that my current situation, while difficult, was chosen freely rather than forced upon me. I am not alone, and I am not in immediate danger. Perhaps someday I will be able to explain everything, but for now, please trust that I am doing what I believe to be right, even if it is not what any of us would have chosen. Your loving daughter, Cassandra. She sealed the letter without allowing herself to reconsider its contents. Any attempt to provide more details would only create additional dangers for everyone involved. It will reach them within 2 weeks, Santiago assured her, accepting the letter along with a gold coin that represented payment far in excess of the service provided. My drivers are reliable, and they understand the importance of discretion. As evening deepened into full night, the trading post's other guests began to gather in the main room. They were a diverse group, a family of homesteaders heading west, 2 miners returning from claims in the northern mountains, a circuit preacher whose worn Bible suggested long experience with frontier congregations, and a cattle buyer whose expensive clothes contrasted sharply with the practical garb of the other travelers. Conversation flowed around topics carefully chosen to avoid sensitive subjects. Weather, trail conditions, and general news from distant settlements provided safe ground for social interaction, while personal details remained largely unspoken. It was a delicate dance of civilized behavior, adapted to circumstances where too much curiosity could prove dangerous for everyone involved. Marcus participated in these conversations with the easy confidence of someone accustomed to navigating social situations without revealing more than necessary about himself. He discussed horse breeding with the cattle buyer, shared trail knowledge with the homesteaders, and even engaged the preacher in a thoughtful conversation about the theological implications of redemption and second chances. Watching him interact with these strangers, Cassandra saw yet another facet of the man she was still learning to understand. The fugitive outlaw, the patient suitor, the desperate rescuer, all were real aspects of Marcus Blackwood's character. But so was this socially adept individual who could find common ground with people from vastly different backgrounds. "You're full of surprises," she murmured during a lull in the general conversation. 3 years on the run teaches you to adapt quickly to new situations," he replied quietly. "Sometimes the best hiding place is right out in the open, as long as you can convince people you belong there." "And do you?" "Belong here, I mean, among these people living normal lives?" Marcus considered the question seriously. "I don't know yet, but I'm starting to think that belonging might be less about where you came from and more about where you choose to go." The evening progressed with the comfortable rhythms of shared human company, but underlying the surface normalcy lay currents of tension that only Cassandra and Marcus could fully perceive. Every sound from outside might herald the arrival of pursuing lawmen. Every glance from fellow guests might indicate suspicious recognition. The sanctuary of Santiago's crossing was real but temporary, a brief respite in a journey whose ultimate destination remained uncertain. When the time came to retire for the night, Santiago led them to adjacent rooms in a building separate from the main structure. The accommodations were simple but clean, narrow beds with sturdy frames, wash basins with fresh water, and windows positioned to provide cross-ventilation during hot weather. "Sleep well," Santiago said, handing them each a key. "Tomorrow will bring its own challenges, but tonight you are safe here." Alone in her room, Cassandra found sleep elusive despite her exhaustion. The events of the past 24 hours played endlessly through her mind, each scene bringing fresh waves of disbelief at how completely her life had changed. This time yesterday, she had been a prisoner fearing for her life. Now she was a fugitive facing an uncertain future with a man she had both loved and betrayed. Through the thin wall separating their rooms, she could hear Marcus moving restlessly, apparently experiencing similar difficulties with sleep. The knowledge that he was so close, just beyond a few inches of adobe and wood, created a strange mixture of comfort and anxiety. They had committed to facing the future together, but the practical implications of that commitment remained largely unexplored. A soft knock on her door interrupted these circular thoughts. She opened it to find Marcus standing in the hallway, fully dressed despite the late hour. "Can't sleep either?" he asked quietly. "Too much to think about, I suppose. Too many changes happening too quickly. Walk with me?" The courtyard should be quiet this time of night, and sometimes talking helps organize thoughts that won't settle on their own. The courtyard was indeed peaceful, lit by starlight and the soft glow from windows where other guests had retired for the night. They walked slowly along the perimeter, their footsteps muffled by sand and dust that had accumulated in the corners where wind deposited the desert's constant offerings. "I keep thinking about the letter I sent to my parents," Cassandra said. "Eventually. About how inadequate it was, how much it left unexplained. You told them what they needed to know, that you're alive and safe. The rest can wait until you understand it better yourself." "Will I? Understand it, I mean. Because right now, it feels like I'm playing a role in someone else's story, making decisions that belong to a different person entirely." Marcus stopped walking and turned to face her directly. In the starlight, his features were softened but still clearly defined, and his eyes held the patient attention she remembered from their courtship days. "That feeling doesn't entirely go away," he said honestly. "Even now, 3 years after my first wanted poster, there are moments when I look in a mirror and don't immediately recognize the man looking back. But gradually, you realize that all the different versions of yourself are still you, just adapted to different circumstances. And if the circumstances keep changing, if we never find a place where we can stop running and build something stable, then we adapt again, together this time instead of separately. Maybe stability isn't about finding the perfect place, but about finding the right person to face uncertainty with." His words carried a conviction that she wanted desperately to share. But doubt remained like a persistent ache. Could love really be enough to overcome the practical challenges they faced? Could two people build something lasting while constantly looking over their shoulders for pursuing lawmen and vengeful enemies? "I'm scared," she admitted. "Not of being caught exactly, but of losing myself completely in this new life. Of becoming someone I don't recognize or respect." "Then we'll make sure that doesn't happen. We'll remind each other who we want to be, even when circumstances pressure us to become something else. We'll build our own moral code and stick to it, regardless of what the world tries to make us into." The simple sincerity in his voice cut through her doubts more effectively than elaborate arguments could have. This was the Marcus she had fallen in love with in Copper Ridge, the man who approached complex problems with practical wisdom and unshakable integrity. The outlaw past and uncertain future couldn't change the fundamental decency that had drawn her to him in the first place. "Together," she repeated, testing the word's weight and finding it surprisingly solid. "Together," he confirmed, and something in the way he said it made it sound like a promise that extended far beyond their immediate circumstances. They returned to their rooms as the night deepened toward dawn, but Cassandra found that the restlessness that had plagued her earlier had finally eased. The future remained uncertain, filled with dangers and challenges that she couldn't yet imagine. But for the first time since her kidnapping began, she felt genuinely hopeful about what lay ahead. Tomorrow would bring new decisions and fresh obstacles, but it would also bring opportunities to define themselves on their own terms, rather than according to other people's expectations or judgments. The careful life she had planned in Copper Ridge was gone forever, but in its place lay possibilities that were both terrifying and exhilarating in their unlimited scope. Whatever came next, she would face it with Marcus Blackwood at her side, not as the woman she had been, but as the person she was choosing to become. Dawn came to Santiago's crossing with the sudden intensity that characterized desert mornings, transforming the star-filled darkness into blazing gold within minutes. Cassandra woke to the sound of activity in the courtyard, horses being saddled, supplies loaded, and quiet conversations between travelers, preparing to continue their journeys toward distant destinations. She dressed quickly in the trail clothes that Maria had provided, practical garments more suited to hard travel than the remnants of her kidnapped dress. The transformation was more than cosmetic. Looking at herself in the small mirror above the wash basin, she saw a woman who belonged in this frontier setting, rather than behind the counter of a general store in a settled town. Marcus was already waiting in the main building when she emerged, his arm still supported by the sling, but his color improved after a night of genuine rest. He had been deep in conversation with Santiago, and both men looked up as she approached their table. "Good news and concerning news," Marcus said without preamble. Santiago's contacts report that the federal marshals have expanded their search, but they're focusing their efforts on the established trade routes heading toward California and Mexico. "Which means?" Cassandra asked, accepting the cup of coffee that Santiago poured for her. "Which means we have an opportunity if we're willing to take a more difficult path," Santiago replied. "There are routes through the high country that avoid the main trails entirely. Harder travel, more dangerous, but less likely to encounter official attention." Marcus spread a hand-drawn map across the table, its surface marked with trails, water sources, and terrain features rendered in careful detail. "This route leads northeast through the mountains, then curves back west toward the Colorado River. It adds perhaps 2 weeks to the journey, but it passes through a country where federal authority is mostly theoretical." Cassandra studied the map, noting the sparse markings that indicated settlements and the vast empty spaces between them. It was a country that would test both their endurance and their commitment to building a new life together. "What's the concerning news?" she asked. Santiago's expression grew serious. "Word has reached certain interested parties about the events at the line shack. Garrett's death has created opportunities for other men with similar dispositions, and some of them have long memories regarding past grievances." "Meaning?" "Meaning that federal marshals may not be our only concern," Marcus said grimly. "Garrett had associates who weren't present for our final conversation. Men who might feel obligated to avenge his death or continue his pursuit of that missing Army payroll money. The prospect of additional enemies pursuing them added new layers of complexity to their situation. It wasn't enough to simply evade official law enforcement. They would also need to watch for private vengeance seekers whose motivations might prove even more dangerous." "How many are we talking about?" Cassandra asked. "Unknown." Garrett's network was extensive but secretive. "Could be 2 men, could be 20. The uncertainty is part of what makes them dangerous." Santiago rolled up the map and handed it to Marcus along with a leather tube designed to protect it from weather and rough handling. "I have prepared supplies for 2 weeks of mountain travel. Food, ammunition, medical provisions. Also letters of introduction to certain individuals along the route who can be trusted to provide assistance without asking uncomfortable questions." The efficiency with which Santiago had arranged these preparations suggested that helping fugitives navigate treacherous terrain was a regular part of his business. Cassandra found herself grateful for his professional competence, even as she wondered about the moral implications of a world where such services were necessary. They completed their preparations as the sun climbed higher, loading pack saddles with supplies while their horses rested in the shade of the stable building. The animals had recovered well from the previous day's hard travel, and the prospect of mountain trails seemed to appeal to them more than continued desert crossing. Other guests were departing as well, the homesteading family loading their wagon with children and household goods while the cattle buyers saddled a horse that looked capable of covering significant distances at speed. The normal rhythms of frontier life continued around them, providing both cover for their departure and a reminder of the ordinary existence they were leaving behind. "One final piece of advice," Santiago said as they prepared to mount their horses. "The high country changes men, sometimes in ways they don't expect. The isolation, the constant danger, the need to depend entirely on your own resources, it can either strengthen partnerships or destroy them completely." His words carried the weight of personal experience, and Cassandra found herself wondering what stories lay behind Santiago's decision to establish his trading post in such a remote country. How many couples had passed through his establishment, fleeing toward uncertain futures? How many had succeeded in building new lives, And how many had discovered that love alone wasn't sufficient to overcome the challenges they faced? "We'll remember that," Marcus replied, securing his rifle in its saddle scabbard with movements that spoke of long practice. "See that you do. And remember also that Santiago's crossing will always welcome travelers who approach with honest intentions. And gold to pay for services rendered." They rode out as the morning heat began building toward its daily crescendo, following a trail that led northeast into country that grew progressively more mountainous with each mile. The desert gradually gave way to high plateau terrain dotted with pinyon pine and juniper, while distant peaks promised cooler temperatures and different challenges than those they were leaving behind. The transformation in landscape paralleled changes in their relationship dynamics. The desperate urgency that had characterized their escape from the line shack was giving way to something more thoughtful and deliberate. They had time now to talk, to explore the implications of their shared future, and to address questions that circumstances had previously forced them to defer. "Tell me about the mountains," Cassandra said as they paused to rest their horses beside a creek that tumbled down from hidden heights. "What should I expect from a country like this?" Marcus studied the terrain ahead with the experienced eye of someone who had traveled through similar regions. "Beautiful and dangerous in equal measure. The air gets thin enough to leave you breathless, and weather can change from pleasant to deadly in minutes. But there's a kind of peace up there that you can't find in a settled country." "Peace?" "The kind that comes from being so far from civilization that your problems become very simple and immediate. Stay warm, find food, avoid falling off cliffs. It strips away everything that isn't essential and leaves you with a clearer understanding of what actually matters." As they climbed higher into the foothills, Cassandra began to understand what he meant. The vast complexity of their situation wanted posters, federal marshals, vengeful outlaws. Abandoned families seemed less overwhelming when measured against the immediate challenges of navigating rocky trails and reading weather signs and gathering clouds. The first night of mountain travel brought new experiences that tested her adaptation to this transformed life. They made camp in a sheltered grove where a spring provided fresh water and scattered boulders offered protection from wind that carried the bite of high altitude. Marcus demonstrated the art of building a fire that would provide warmth without creating visible smoke, while Cassandra learned to prepare meals from trail rations that bore little resemblance to the varied cuisine she had taken for granted in Copper Ridge. "I keep thinking about my mother's kitchen," she said as they shared beans and hardtack beside the carefully banked fire. "About Sunday dinners and fresh bread and all the small comforts that seemed so ordinary when I had them. Do you regret leaving all that behind?" The question hung between them like a challenge, demanding honesty that went beyond polite reassurance. Cassandra considered it seriously, weighing the genuine losses against the unexpected discoveries of their journey. "I regret the pain my parents are experiencing," she said finally. "I regret that my choices have cost them a daughter and me a family. But I don't regret choosing this path over the alternatives that were available, even knowing that it might get much harder before it gets easier. Especially knowing that, because the alternative was spending the rest of my life wondering what might have happened if I'd been brave enough to trust in something uncertain instead of clinging to something that only seemed safe." Marcus nodded as if this confirmed something he had hoped but not dared to assume. "Then we'll make it work. Whatever it takes, however long it takes, we'll build something worth the sacrifices we've made." The second day brought their first real test of mountain travel skills. The trail they were following deteriorated into a series of game paths that required constant navigation decisions, while afternoon thunderstorms turned exposed rock faces into treacherous obstacles that had to be negotiated with extreme care. By evening, both horses and riders were exhausted from the physical and mental demands of high-altitude travel. They made camp that night in a natural shelter, formed by an overhang of red sandstone, the rock still radiating heat absorbed during the day despite the cooling air temperature. As darkness fell and stars appeared with the startling brilliance that characterized thin mountain air, they found themselves closer together than simple necessity required. "Cassandra," Marcus said, quietly, his voice carrying uncertainties that daylight would have made impossible to express. "I need you to understand something about what we're doing here, about what I'm asking you to share with me." She waited, sensing that this was a conversation that had been building since their first night at Santiago's crossing. "This isn't just about running from the law or building a new life in some distant place. It's about choosing to be together despite knowing that our future is completely uncertain. That we might spend years moving from place to place, never able to settle, never able to build the kind of stable home that most people take for granted. I know that. Do you? Because in Copper Ridge, when things got complicated, you chose certainty over risk. You chose the known quantity over the uncertain one. And I need to be sure that you're not making this choice out of guilt or obligation, but because you genuinely want this life, even with all its disadvantages." The directness of his question demanded an equally direct response. Cassandra looked up at the stars that seemed close enough to touch in the thin air, then back at Marcus's face in the firelight. "In Copper Ridge, I was trying to love you while remaining the person I had always been. Safe, cautious, unwilling to risk the comfortable life I had built for myself. But that person doesn't exist anymore. She died in that line shack when I pulled the trigger and killed a man to save your life." She paused, gathering her thoughts and her courage. "The woman I am now, the one sitting here with you in the middle of nowhere, choosing an uncertain future over a safe past, she's someone I'm still getting to know. But I think I like her better than the careful merchant's daughter, who was too frightened to trust the man she claimed to love." Marcus reached across the small space between them, his hand finding hers with the careful reverence of someone handling something precious and fragile. "Then we'll discover together who we're becoming. And we'll make sure that whatever we build is worth the journey it took to get there." They spent the third day climbing toward a pass that would take them over the divide between watersheds, a crossing that Marcus's map indicated was both challenging and spectacular. The trail switched back up slopes covered with aspen trees, whose leaves had begun turning gold with the approach of autumn, creating a landscape that seemed painted with metallic light. Near the summit, they encountered their first sign that they were not alone in the high country. Horse tracks in a muddy section of trail were too fresh to have been made by previous travelers, and the deliberate way they overlaid the existing path suggested that someone was following their route with careful attention to concealment. "How many?" Cassandra asked, though she had already begun scanning the surrounding terrain for potential ambush sites. Marcus dismounted to examine the tracks more closely, his expression growing increasingly grim as he read the story written and displaced. "Earth and bent grass. 3 horses, maybe 4. Moving carefully, trying to stay behind us without getting too close. Professional work, not casual travelers heading in the same direction." The reality of pursuit added new urgency to their mountain crossing. Whatever sanctuary the high country might have offered was compromised by the presence of enemies who had managed to track them despite their precautions. The isolation that had seemed like protection now felt like vulnerability. No witnesses, no help, no authorities to appeal to if violence became inevitable. "How long have they been following us?" "Hard to say. Could have picked up our trail at Santiago's crossing. Could have been tracking us since we left the line shack. The important thing now is to reach the pass and find defensive ground before they decide to close the distance." They pushed their horses harder than the altitude recommended, gambling that speed would serve them better than caution in reaching the summit before their pursuers could bring them to bay on the exposed slopes. The air grew thinner with each switchback, leaving both riders and animals gasping for breath that seemed inadequate to fuel their exertions. The pass itself proved to be a narrow gap between towering peaks, a place where ancient geological forces had carved a passage through rock that seemed otherwise impenetrable. Wind howled through the opening with the voice of winter carrying scents of snow from heights that never saw summer warmth. From the summit, they could see the country spread out below them in both directions, the route they had climbed and the descent that awaited them on the far side. More importantly, they could see movement on the trail behind them, tiny figures that resolved into mounted men as Marcus focused his field glasses on their back trail. 4 riders, he confirmed. Moving fast now that they know we've spotted them. They'll reach the pass within an hour. Who are they? Unknown. Could be federal marshals, could be bounty hunters, could be what's left of Garrett's gang. Does it matter? They're armed, they're determined, and they're not here to invite us to dinner. The descent from the pass offered both opportunity and danger. The trail was steep and treacherous, requiring careful navigation that would slow their pursuers, but would also make their own escape more difficult if something went wrong. Loose rock and narrow ledges created natural hazards that could kill the unwary as efficiently as any bullet, but it also offered the possibility of ambush sites, where 2 people with good rifles could hold off a larger force, at least temporarily. If they were going to make a stand, the broken country below the pass provided better options than the exposed summit they currently occupied. We go down fast and find good ground, Marcus decided. If they want a fight, we'll give them one on our terms instead of theirs. As they began their descent into the unknown country beyond the mountains, Cassandra felt the weight of decision settling around them like a physical presence. Whatever happened in the next few hours would determine whether their journey toward a new life together would continue or end among the rocks and snow of a high mountain pass. Behind them, their pursuers had reached the summit and begun their own descent, the gap between hunter and hunted narrowing with each passing minute. The final confrontation that had been building since they rode away from the line shack was approaching. And this time there would be no trading post neutrality to protect them, no Santiago to mediate between opposing forces. There would be only the mountains, the approaching winter, and the choices that 2 people made when everything they had built together was threatened by those who refused to let the past remain buried. The descent from the mountain pass proved even more treacherous than Marcus had anticipated. What appeared from above to be a manageable trail revealed itself as a series of switchbacks carved into sheer rock faces, with drop-offs that plunged hundreds of feet into valleys shrouded by afternoon mist. Each step required careful calculation as loose shale shifted under their horses' hooves, threatening to send riders and animals tumbling into the abyss below. Cassandra found herself drawing on reserves of courage she hadn't known she possessed. The careful merchant's daughter who had once worried about propriety and social expectations seemed like a stranger compared to the woman now guiding her horse along ledges barely wide enough for safe passage. Fear remained, but it had transformed from paralyzing terror into heightened awareness that sharpened her focus to razor intensity. "There," Marcus called softly, pointing toward a natural shelf of rock perhaps a quarter-mile below their current position. That outcropping provides cover from above and clear fields of fire down the trail. If we can reach it before they clear the pass, we can control the engagement. The tactical analysis came naturally to him, a skill learned during years of evading pursuit through difficult terrain. But Cassandra heard something else in his voice, of grim satisfaction at the prospect of finally confronting enemies who had forced them to flee rather than continuing to run from superior numbers and resources. They pushed their horses harder than safety recommended, descending through air that grew thicker and warmer with each switchback. Behind them, the sound of shod hooves on stone echoed off the canyon walls, their pursuers making no attempt at concealment now that the chase had entered its final phase. The defensive position Marcus had identified proved even better than it had appeared from above. A natural fortress of red sandstone provided cover from multiple directions while offering commanding views of the approaches. More importantly, a hidden spring trickled from cracks in the rock face, ensuring that they wouldn't be forced to surrender due to thirst if the confrontation extended beyond a few hours. They positioned their horses in a sheltered depression behind the main outcropping, securing them with enough slack in their leads to allow movement while preventing panic-driven flight. The animals seemed to sense the approaching danger, their ears constantly moving as they tracked sounds from the trail above. 4 rifles, Marcus confirmed as he checked their weapons and ammunition. Probably experienced shooters, given how efficiently they've tracked us through a country that would lose most casual pursuers. Any chance they're actually federal marshals? Cassandra asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Federal. Marshals would have identified themselves by now, demanded surrender, followed proper procedures. These men are operating under different rules entirely. As if summoned by their conversation, a voice echoed down from the trail above, distorted by distance and canyon acoustics, but still clearly audible. Marcus Blackwood. We know you're down there. Let's discuss this like civilized men instead of playing hide-and-seek in the rocks. The accent was unmistakably Southern, cultured in the way that suggested education and social position before whatever circumstances had driven its owner to pursue fugitives through mountain wilderness. Marcus cupped his hands around his mouth to project his response without revealing their exact position. Nothing to discuss, friend. You came hunting and you found what you were looking for. The question is whether you're prepared for what comes. Next, bitter laughter drifted down from above. Oh, I'm prepared, Mr. Blackwood. More prepared than you might imagine. Allow me to introduce myself properly. Colonel Jefferson Hartwell, late of the Confederate Army and more recently a business associate of the late Garrett Morrison. The title explained much about their pursuer's tactical competence and the methodical way he had managed their chase. Military experience, particularly from the recent war, had created a generation of men skilled in violence and comfortable with command decisions that civilian life rarely required. Garrett's dead, Marcus called back. Whatever business you had with him ended when he decided to make this personal. On the contrary, Mr. Blackwood, Garrett's death merely transferred certain obligations to those of us who survived to honor them. You see, there are debts that transcend the grave, particularly when they involve matters of honor and substantial sums of money. Cassandra felt a chill that had nothing to do with mountain air. This wasn't about simple revenge or even the recovered bank money that Marcus had offered Garrett. There were deeper currents at work, complications that traced back to criminal enterprises she was only beginning to understand. What do you want, Hartwell? Justice, Mr. Blackwood. Justice for crimes that extend far beyond a single bank robbery in Denver. You see, Garrett shared certain information before his untimely demise, including details about a young woman whose unfortunate involvement in recent events has created additional complications. The implication sent ice through Cassandra's veins. Somehow, word of her role in the Line Shack shootout had reached these men, transforming her from innocent victim into active participant in crimes that demanded retribution. She had nothing to do with your business with Garrett, Marcus replied, though his voice carried new tension. Perhaps not originally. But actions have consequences, Mr. Blackwood, and Miss Wells's actions at that Line Shack created consequences that extend far beyond her original intentions. 3 men died there, including one who carried information that certain interested parties would very much like to recover. The reference to information suggested layers of conspiracy that neither Marcus nor Cassandra had suspected. Whatever Garrett and his associates had been involved in went beyond simple robbery into territories that attracted the attention of powerful people with long reaches and longer memories. Let's cut to the heart of it, Hartwell, Marcus called. What exactly are you proposing? A trade, Mr. Blackwood. The young lady's life in exchange for information that Tommy Morrison carried when Miss Wells shot him down. Information that died with him, but which you might be able to help us reconstruct. The casual way Hartwell discussed trading her life chilled Cassandra to the bone, but it also clarified the stakes with brutal honesty. This wasn't a negotiation between equals. It was a demand backed by superior firepower and tactical position. And if I refuse, then Miss Wells pays the price for her unfortunate choice to involve herself in matters that should have remained between men. You, Mr. Blackwood, will be permitted to ride away and continue your fugitive existence, sadder, but wiser about the costs of misplaced chivalry. The offer revealed Hartwell's understanding of human psychology. He was betting that Marcus's feelings for Cassandra would overcome his survival instincts, forcing him to accept terms that favored their pursuers. It was a calculated gamble based on observed behavior and masculine pride. Marcus met Cassandra's eyes across their stone shelter, and she reflected there the same grim determination that had brought him riding to her rescue at the line shack. He would never accept Hartwell's terms, which meant that their only option was to fight their way out against odds that seemed increasingly impossible. "Counter-proposal, Colonel," Marcus shouted. "You and your boys ride back the way you came, and we'll pretend this conversation never happened. Keep pushing, and some of you won't be riding anywhere ever again." Brave words from a man trapped in a hole with limited ammunition and no way out. "But I admire your spirit, Mr. Blackwood. It will make this more interesting than simple execution." The conversation ended as gunfire erupted from multiple positions above their shelter. Bullets sparked off stone and whined through the air with the angry buzz of disturbed hornets, forcing Cassandra and Marcus to press themselves against the rock face as lead fragments showered around them. The attack was more about establishing dominance than achieving immediate results. Hartwell's men were testing their defenses, gauging their response capabilities, and demonstrating the futility of resistance against superior numbers and position. It was professional work, calculated to demoralize rather than destroy. "There, positioned at 3 points above us," Marcus observed during a lull in the firing. "Classic triangulation that gives them overlapping fields of fire and prevents us from concentrating our response effectively. How long can we hold them off? Depends on their ammunition supply and their patience. They have every advantage except time. Winter's coming to these mountains, and they don't want to be caught up here when the serious snow starts falling." As if to emphasize his point, wind gusts through the canyon with increasing force, carrying the scent of moisture and the promise of weather changes that could transform their standoff into a survival situation for everyone involved. The second assault came at sunset, when shifting light and lengthening shadows created opportunities for movement that hadn't existed during the bright afternoon. This time, the attack was coordinated and purposeful, designed to probe their defenses and identify weaknesses that could be exploited in subsequent efforts. Cassandra found herself firing her rifle with deadly precision, the violence she had discovered at the line shack emerging again under pressure. Each shot was calculated to count, ammunition being too precious to waste on intimidation or suppressing fire. She aimed for specific targets and felt grim satisfaction when her bullets found their marks. "Good shooting," Marcus said during another lull, genuine admiration in his voice. "Where did you learn to handle a rifle like that?" "My father taught me when I was 12. Said a woman alone on the frontier needed to be able to defend herself and her property." She checked her remaining cartridges, counting rounds with the automatic efficiency of someone who understood that mathematics would determine survival. "I never thought I'd need the skill for something like this. Your father was a wise man. That shooting may be the only thing that keeps us alive long enough to see the morning." The third assault came in full darkness, preceded by a shower of burning branches that Hartwell's men lobbed into their position in an attempt to illuminate targets and create panic. The flames revealed their shelter in stark detail while providing enemy shooters with clear aim points for their coordinated fire, but the light worked both ways, and Marcus used the illumination to devastating effect with his rifle, picking off. One of their attackers with a shot that echoed through the canyon like thunder. The man's scream cut off abruptly as he tumbled from his perch, his rifle clattering down the rock face to disappear into the darkness below. 3 left, Marcus reported with professional satisfaction. And they're starting to understand that this won't be as easy as they expected. The night settled into a pattern of sporadic exchanges, each side conserving ammunition while waiting for opportunities to gain decisive advantage. Cassandra dozed fitfully between alerts, her body pressed against stone that radiated the day's accumulated heat even as air temperatures dropped toward freezing. Dawn brought new challenges as storm clouds gathered above the peaks, promising weather that would complicate everyone's situation. The first snowflakes began falling as pale light revealed the tactical situation with unforgiving clarity. Hartwell had lost 1 man but still maintained superior position and firepower. However, the approaching storm threatened to trap everyone in the high country for days or weeks, transforming their conflict into a test of endurance that might favor the defenders despite their numerical disadvantage. Blackwood. Hartwell's voice carried new urgency as wind began howling through the rocks with increasing intensity. This storm is going to bury us all if we don't resolve this quickly. Last chance for reasonable negotiation. Same terms as yesterday, Colonel. Right away, and everyone goes home alive. Unacceptable, but perhaps we can reach a different arrangement. Single combat between you and me, winner takes the spoils. Your lady friend gets to live regardless of the outcome. The challenge carried echoes of an older, more formal time, when disputes between gentlemen were settled through personal combat rather than wholesale slaughter. It also represented Hartwell's recognition that his tactical advantages were being eroded by weather and time. Marcus looked at Cassandra, and she read the question in his eyes. He was willing to accept the challenge if she agreed, risking everything on his ability to defeat a man whose military experience and tactical skill had already been demonstrated. No, she said firmly. We've come this far together, and we'll finish it together. Whatever happens next, we face it as partners, even if that means we both die in these rocks. Even then, I won't let you sacrifice yourself for the chance that he might honor his word about sparing me. We trust each other, or we trust no one. Marcus nodded as if this confirmed something he had hoped but needed to hear spoken aloud. Then we make our own terms, together. He raised his voice to carry over the increasing wind. Counteroffer, Hartwell. You and your remaining men come down here and settle this face to face, like the soldiers you claim to be. Or keep hiding in the rocks and shooting from cover like the cowards you've proven yourselves to be. The insult was calculated to sting military pride and force a response that would level the tactical playing field. It was a desperate gamble, but desperation had become their most reliable ally in a situation where conventional tactics favored their enemies. Hartwell's laughter cut through the wind like a blade. Well played, Mr. Blackwood, very well played. Indeed, you understand that you're proposing mutual suicide, don't you? I'm proposing that we settle this honestly instead of hiding behind advantages that winter weather is about to eliminate anyway. The snowfall increased in intensity as Hartwell considered the challenge, flakes swirling through the canyon with the chaotic energy of approaching blizzard conditions. Whatever decision he made would have to come quickly before weather rendered all their tactical considerations irrelevant. So be it, Hartwell called finally. You want an honest fight? You shall have one. The sound of men moving down the rock face carried clearly through the thin air, and Cassandra felt her heart hammering against her ribs as she checked her weapons one final time. Everything they had built together, every choice they had made since leaving Copper Ridge, had led to this moment among the rocks and snow of a high mountain pass. Whatever happened in the next few minutes would determine whether their story ended in tragedy or continued toward the uncertain but hopeful future they had chosen to pursue together. The blizzard descended upon the mountain pass with the fury of winter unleashed early, transforming their standoff into a battle against nature itself. Snow fell in thick curtains that reduced visibility to mere yards, while wind howled through the rocks with voices that seemed to mock human ambition and planning. Hartwell and his two remaining men emerged from the storm like ghosts materialized. From the white chaos, their forms indistinct until they were close enough for Gunfire to be decisive. The colonel himself led the advance, moving with the measured confidence of a man who had survived too many battles to be intimidated by either weather or desperate opponents. The final confrontation erupted without ceremony or formal declaration. Hartwell's rifle spoke first, its report almost lost in the wind as his bullet sparked off the stone where Marcus had been standing a heartbeat before. Return fire came from 3 positions simultaneously as Cassandra and Marcus engaged targets that appeared and disappeared in the swirling snow like deadly phantoms in the chaos that followed. Traditional tactics became impossible. The storm had reduced their conflict to its most primitive elements: individual survival, split-second decisions, and the deadly arithmetic of ammunition expenditure. Cassandra found herself moving by instinct rather than conscious thought, her rifle finding targets through breaks in the snow while her feet navigated treacherous footing without conscious direction. A cry of pain from Marcus sent terror shooting through her, but when she reached his position behind a boulder, she found him binding a flesh wound on his left arm, with strips torn from his shirt. "Graze only," he said through gritted teeth. "Hartwell's a better shot than I gave him credit for. How many are left?" 2, maybe 3. Hard to tell in this storm. But they're hurting too. I saw one of them go down hard when you put that bullet through his shoulder. The blizzard was becoming their unlikely ally. While it made accurate shooting nearly impossible for both sides, it also provided cover that allowed them to change positions and avoid the coordinated fire that had pinned them down earlier. More importantly, it was forcing their enemies to make desperate moves rather than relying on superior tactical positions. Through a brief lull in the snowfall, Cassandra caught sight of Hartwell himself, crouched behind a fallen log perhaps 30 yards away. His refined features were set in lines of grim determination, but she could see the calculation in his eyes as he weighed diminishing options against mounting costs. "Colonel," she called out, her voice carrying clearly in the momentary quiet, "your men are dying for nothing. Whatever information you think we have died with Tommy Morrison, there's nothing left to fight for." Hartwell's laugh carried a bitter edge. "You underestimate the value of principle, Miss Wells. Some debts can only be paid in blood, regardless of practical considerations. Then you'll die for your principles in this storm, and your bones will lie here until spring thaw reveals them. To the buzzards, perhaps, but so will yours, and that serves justice well enough." The conversation ended as Gunfire resumed, but something had changed in the rhythm of the engagement. Desperation was replacing tactics on both sides as ammunition ran low and the storm continued to worsen. This was no longer about tactical victory or strategic advantage. It had become a simple test of who could endure longest under impossible conditions. Marcus took his shot when Hartwell exposed himself to aim at Cassandra's position. The bullet took the colonel's center mass, spinning him around before he collapsed into the snow that was already beginning to cover the other bodies scattered across the battlefield. His death ended the immediate threat, but it also left them stranded in deteriorating weather with wounded horses and dwindling supplies. "We need shelter," Marcus said as they gathered their scattered equipment in the brief quiet that followed. Hartwell's fall. "This storm isn't letting up, and we're not equipped for extended exposure at this altitude." They found refuge in a natural cave system that honeycombed the cliff face behind their defensive position. The chambers were deep enough to provide protection from wind and snow while offering multiple exits if circumstances demanded rapid departure. Most importantly, the rock walls would hold heat from a small fire. creating a sanctuary where they could wait out the storm's fury. The next 3 days passed in a strange mixture of intimacy and isolation as the blizzard raged outside their shelter. They shared warmth and food and conversation that ranged from practical survival concerns to philosophical questions about the nature of justice and redemption. Cut off from the outside world by weather that made travel impossible, they had time to truly examine what they had built together and what they wanted it to become. "I keep thinking about my father's store," Cassandra said as they watched snow fall past the cave entrance. "About the life I thought I wanted and how little it resembles what I actually needed. Any regrets? About killing those men? About running away with an outlaw? About choosing uncertainty over safety?" She considered the question seriously. "No, I regret the pain we've caused others, especially my parents. But I don't regret becoming who I needed to be rather than remaining who I was expected to be." When the storm finally exhausted itself and clear skies returned to the high country, they emerged to find a world transformed by snow and ice. The trail down from the pass would be treacherous but passable, and the weather had likely eliminated any remaining pursuit from law enforcement agencies that lacked the resources or motivation for extended winter campaigns. They buried the dead as best they could in ground frozen too hard for proper graves, marking the location so that spring travelers might provide more permanent interment. It was a small gesture toward civilization in a place where violence had temporarily overwhelmed human decency. The descent from the mountains took another week, navigating icy trails that required constant vigilance and perfect communication between horse and rider. But with each mile toward lower elevations, the promise of spring and new beginnings grew stronger. They were no longer running from something, but toward something future they would define on their own terms. 6 months later, in a valley where no wanted posters carried their names and no one asked questions about past lives, Marcus Blackwood and Cassandra Wells were married by a circuit preacher whose only requirements were honest payment and genuine commitment. The ceremony was simple, witnessed by neighbors who knew them as hard-working people who had chosen a difficult country because it offered freedom from complications that pursued those with conventional pasts. They built their ranch slowly, starting with a small cabin beside a creek that ran year-round and gradually adding corrals and outbuildings as their horse-breeding operation began generating steady income. The work was hard but honest, requiring skills that Marcus possessed in abundance and others that Cassandra learned with the determined efficiency she brought to every challenge. Letters arrived twice a year from Copper Ridge, carried by freight drivers who asked no questions about their ultimate destinations. Thomas and Martha Wells had accepted their daughter's choice with the grace of parents who loved her enough to want her happiness over their own peace of mind. They never asked for details about her new life, understanding that some stories were better left partially untold. The final letter arrived on a spring morning when Cassandra was heavy with their first child, her condition a source of joy tempered by the practical concerns of bringing new life into a world where safety was never guaranteed. Thomas Wells had died peacefully in his sleep, her mother wrote, but not before expressing pride in the strength his daughter had shown in choosing love over comfort, adventure over security. "He would have liked to see this place," Marcus said as they stood on their porch watching horses graze in pastures green with spring grass. "Would have appreciated what we've built here." "I think he did see it," Cassandra replied, one hand resting on the life growing within her. "I think he understood better than I gave him credit for that. Sometimes the greatest gift parents can give their children is the courage to become who they need to be." Their story had begun with betrayal and violence, pursued through desert and mountain by men whose understanding of justice extended no further than revenge. But it had transformed into something that neither could have imagined when they first met in a general store in Copper Ridge, a partnership forged by shared danger and tempered by mutual respect, a love that had survived the test of circumstances. That would have destroyed weaker foundations. The wanted posters had yellowed and been replaced by notices of more recent crimes. Federal marshals had turned their attention to other fugitives whose trails were fresher and more promising. The past remained part of their story but no longer defined their future, which stretched ahead with possibilities limited only by their willingness to work for what they wanted. As evening painted the sky in shades of gold and purple that reminded them both of desert sunsets in a time that seemed like someone else's memories, Marcus and Cassandra Blackwood stood together on land they had earned through choices that cost them everything they thought they wanted and gave them everything they actually needed. Their story had no neat endings or simple morals, only the complex truth that people could change, that love could survive transformation, and that sometimes the most honest thing two people could do was choose each other despite knowing that the future would test them in ways they couldn't yet imagine. The desert had taught them about survival. The mountains had taught them about endurance. But this valley, with its green grass and running water, and the promise of children who would know no other life than the one their parents had built from the wreckage of their former selves, was teaching them about hope. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.